Okay guys, hello and welcome back to the Vehicle Maintenance Prepper channel. So let's kick off with the motor vehicle maintenance and technology and the skills you possibly may need. But what I'm going to do here is give you considerations and make your own mind up what you need when you need it. Okay, so yeah, this is a commercial vehicle workshop. And how I'm working now is working on the flat, or that's what we say in the UK, because instead of using a pit or a ramp, what I have is a flat concrete area with lifters. Now this is general purpose because even if you're not using the lifters and you have a loaded trailer, which overall the whole thing will be about 44 tons in weight, okay, you can either use bottle jacks to lift up the axles or crawl underneath. But this vehicle and the lifters, what she weighs about 6.5 tons in total, so I can lift her up, put her on axle stands, so it gives me wheel freeze. Yeah, and the techniques for inspecting vehicles, and this is really where people need to start, is to understand the components of the vehicles, inspecting the vehicles, and understanding what needs to be changed when it needs to be changed, and looking for defects. Okay, and this is what we do. We look generally for defects on vehicles and then rectify them. That's the whole idea of the maintenance, and of course we'll do things like oil changes and all that sort of thing as required. Okay, so that is a skill within itself, is to be able to inspect a vehicle and keep it to a certain standard. That's servicing. Okay, so most guys come into the trade and they start off as a service technician. Okay, that includes car technicians as well, which you can see there's a big difference because we have to lift the cab up first to get to the engine, whereas a car, you just lift the bonnet, don't you? So yeah, you'll recognize this is an engine. Yes, it's an engine. Okay, rocker cover, cylinder head, cylinder block, injectors. A bit lower down you have things like high pressure pump, there's a fuse box there, ECU, and they'll alternator as well. They'll all have a commonality. All vehicles will have commonalities, like yeah, you have fans and pulleys, and then you have a fan there. Okay, so basically you wouldn't get lost if you were jacking up a truck and having a look underneath, and of course you have a dipstick and it has oil, so nothing different there. It's only when you get onto electric vehicles that things start to change. And of course, yes, everything with the truck is bigger because it has to be. Not only has to carry the weight, but the engine's bigger. And of course now they designed sumps to carry a lot more oil so they can go longer between service intervals because labour rates and part rates are expensive. So you've got to know your vehicle components. You know what this is. It's a turbo, isn't it? This is the hot side of an engine because it's got the turbo exhaust and everything else. And it wouldn't be so unfamiliar, or hot side on a 2.2 Transit. Just had a new turbo. Yep, so you got alternator there, you got heating pipes, and then somewhere hidden there you have a thermostat. Same over here, you have a thermostat. Yeah, you recognise that, and an oil filter cap. Yeah, power steering fluid. Yep, you'd recognise that if you have that on your car. Nowadays cars don't. They usually have electric motors, don't they? But yeah, that's actually a little bit low when I dip that. Look. Yeah, this is what we look out for, but knowing where your components are and what they do is vital. Okay, that's a steering box and that is leaking because it's damp. Yeah, it's defect to do. So air filters, such like that. Yeah, it's all the same stuff. So you recognize the components, you realize what they do, and of course then you can orientate yourself around your vehicle. And presumably you don't want to be a mechanic, but you need to understand certain things. So with the car here, yeah, there's not much different. We could walk up to it, and the first thing I will note about that is, yeah, it was a petrol engine. Yeah, it's mounted transversely, okay, which is across from wheel to wheel rather than from front to back. Okay, now if you look at it, you got your air filter inlet, you have some electronic device which controls the air, oil filter housing. Yeah, so you have your cooling, you have your brake pipes. It's not a million miles apart, is it? Yes, okay, but there obviously are differences. Everything that's mechanical has differences. There's a car with a diesel engine in it. Yep, that's a high pressure pump. Okay, once you know what you're looking at, then you can then research, if you don't know, what it does and what tolerances they have and when they break down. Yeah, and how to diagnose them. So yeah, it's for some guys, they already know what they're looking at. Other guys haven't got a clue. When they lift the bonnet, they don't even know where the dipstick is. Okay, so you'll find the guys also that will quote engine sizes, performance, speed and everything else, like top trumps for their cars and their vehicles. They know all about their alloy wheels and everything else that is attached to them, but they don't know how to torque up their own wheels. And if they had a puncture, they wouldn't know how to change the spare wheel, if they even carry one. So this is the difference between preppers and posers. Preppers should know their vehicle inside out. I will over time orientate you, but the first skill is to understand what your vehicle is. And I'll just quickly show you this. This vehicle had a turbo problem. It was hissing air. And the intercooler itself is burst just on the top there, so that will lose pressure, which means it will come up with a fault and you lose power as well. Yes. Right, so you know what this is? Actually, I'm going to give you a heads up here. It's a filter, but it's a very fine filter, very fine micron filter. And this filters bad fuel because there is actually quite a lot of bad fuel about. Okay, that goes into those two filters on that engine before it goes into the fuel system. Yeah, it's actually quite critical. And of course, there is sometimes a filter in the tank. Yep, so a quick look under a truck here, AdBlue system, which you don't want to know about. There's a gearbox and then the transmission, which includes a prop shaft with Hardy Spicer joints or UJ joints. Okay, yeah, nothing different from other vehicles. There is an A-frame up there for the suspension. And it's an axle stabilizer. Okay, and I'll just go onto this axle here and you can see it from the top. It's bolted to the top of the axle and it stabilizes. Yeah, very much the same way as a Land Rover Defender will have on its rear axle. Yeah, so transmissions are not a million miles apart either, and understanding that they do need fluids. This is another thing because you need to understand how to find out the information about what fluids you need in the vehicle and when they need to be changed. So with trucks, and I'll give you a heads up here, trucks have a facility to have a power takeoff. Okay, now this is a hydraulic power takeoff which is bolted to the back of the gearbox and it's enabled to be engaged by air, and then it will have an electric switch to indicate in the cab that it's actually engaged. Okay, now the Land Rover Defender is probably the only lighter vehicle that has a power takeoff from the gearbox. Give you a little bit of a heads up here, power takeoffs for fluid power, which is hydraulics. You can run things like winches and lifts all day long. And I know a lot of people now have a winch, but what they do is they plump for an electric winch, which is valid. However, yeah, it requires two batteries and electrics. Fluid power will run all day, and this is what off-roaders do. They use hydraulics. So the PTO, the hydraulic fluid PTO, will run all sorts of equipment. There's a HIAB here, which is actually a crane. Okay, you see the pipe work, the legs and everything else, and this is a pickup bucket. Yes, so it's a simple power takeoff, as they say. Taking the power off to run hydraulic fluid through motors. Yep. And you can see here's the piping. This is a motor for this system. You have a tipper and there's another motor up the top there, so that's quite complicated. Simple connectors from trailer to truck, yeah, and then you can use a tipping ram to tip the trailer over, yeah, but not all trucks have them. Sometimes they're blanked off, but they always have a facility to have them, whereas smaller vehicles don't. Anything up to 7.5 ton won't have them. But it's actually quite vital to understand that trucks are platforms, so you can fit all types of equipment on there. There's another hydraulic motor there. You can see the chassis, all right. This one is a gritter. Yeah, it spreads grit on the road when we have bad weather. But saying that, you also have hydraulics on forklift trucks, don't you? Yeah, so it's something to consider if you don't know anything about it. If you happen to be in a shtuk and you understand that you're in a situation, if you understand hydraulics, you can use stuff like that. But like I'm saying, smaller vehicles, 3.5 ton downwards, won't have them. Okay, so yeah, gearboxes are the same. They might operate a little bit differently, but they are basically have cogs that can be selected, yeah. So suspension on trucks, yes, you see these leaf spring or airbag mainly. Leaf spring always, yeah, it can break, whereas cars have coil springs and so do vans as well, fronts. Sometimes van will have a leaf spring on the rear, but they always seem to now go for a McPherson strut with a system like this, okay, where the drive shafts are running through the hubs on the front. The engineering can be done up to a certain weight. I know now you can get 6.5 ton vans with drive shafts at front wheel drive, but yeah, you can see the front wheel drive set up here with wishbones, and that will have a spring on it, okay. Basically, they plump for these now because it's easy to manufacture. Yeah, the whole lot gets put onto the car in one go with a subframe. Yep. So basically, I would say commercial vehicle technicians can do all sorts, hydraulics, anything down to lightweight cars, because we understand the systems involved and we can approach repairs. Right, another suspension system is the trailing arm. You will see it on cars on the back axle, beam axle, then it has a trailing arm. Trailers, large heavy trailers with 8-ton axles will have airbags, for instance, instead of coil springs, but yeah, it's basically the same thing, and the fixings of course may be different, but the technology and the idea behind it hasn't changed, okay. So now let's talk about the brakes, okay. Brake chambers, air brake chambers, you will find on commercial vehicles. That is a thing, okay. Now with drum brakes, you have a slack adjuster, which I'm greasing, and the camshaft actually turns as the slack adjuster gets pushed by the brake cylinder piston, okay, and that will apply the brake shoes, okay. So you see the camshaft runs through the slack adjuster there, all right. There is very common on commercial vehicles, if they have brake drums, that you have grease nipples and they have to be maintained on a regular basis, but it's not the same as cars. You will not find this system on any type of car, but the mechanism might be there somewhere. Okay, cars, commercial vehicles, all sorts of things also have calipers, okay. The only difference here is the commercial vehicle has a larger caliper and a brake chamber, okay. Brake systems will have, well, they're not complicated, but they have a series of valves which is only about air control, okay, which will control the air suspension if it has air suspension and the brakes, okay. Yep, so you have relay valves and modulators and stuff like that, and it is becoming simpler, but you have brake chambers, like say on the rear axle, which are anchor lock, which are also a mechanical park brake. Might be losing you by now, but the brake chamber, the mechanical part, is where I have a key in the back, okay. Now when the air is out of the system completely, then the mechanical park brake comes on, whereas you can actually disengage it by the peg that's in the back of the brake chamber, and then the wheel will roll, which could be of use to you if you have to move a truck that's been disabled. If you've got these keys, you can move the truck. Generally, calipers are calipers, disc brakes are disc brakes, hubs are hubs, stub axles are stub axles, and ABS sensors are ABS sensors. And if you have mechanical skills, it's a no-brainer to be able to strip and repair and reassemble again, okay? And it is a daily thing for people, fitters like myself, technicians, to be able to take things off, put them back on again, and check to make sure that they're serviceable, which is a valuable skill. It is a valuable skill. It's only when you can't get the parts, then you have to start to think out of the box. But we're not talking about that today. Basically, I'm just giving you orientation about skills. Another one is electrics. Now, a lot of people are scared of electrics. They don't understand electrics, or they might think they know about electrics and know a sweet FA about them. But basically, you have power in and an earth, so you have in and out, and then you have power for controlling, you have power for sensing, okay? This is probably the simplest system you'll ever see. The plug board here is power in from two different sources and then power out, okay? So these are actually rear lamps, and these two are from the front of the trailer, or from the truck should I say, and then you have your side markers off. You couldn't get simpler than that, but all systems are simple once you understand how they work and you know where your wire positions are and where they go to. Then you can test them if they're faulty, yeah? And faults do come up on electrics as well. Diagnostic and tracing faults is really important. Some are very obvious, like broken components. Others are not. So, yeah, the skill also is to be able to adapt yourself to make up tools if you don't have them or they're too expensive, and to understand that you can get away with testing inline circuits to find faults, okay? And this is one of the things that I do get actually quite regularly, is make up tools if I have repetitive jobs. Like this one on the back of a trailer. There's a marker lamp, but I was suspicious that the wire was broken, which it is. I've tapped into the circuit while it's powered up. There's no power there, so there we go. We have to go and search for it. So yeah, that's another skill in itself, is to recognize how to get round problems. Yes, which everybody has. Males have that. They have that facility. Once they know a system, then they can understand how to tap into it, for instance. Yeah. Motor vehicles, cars, trailers, tractors, plant machinery, anything that has wheels and lights and an engine is going to have electrics, and it probably is one of the most difficult systems for technicians to understand, and it is something to grasp. Once you understand how power flows and how it operates and the components operate, you are already winning, because sooner or later you are going to come across electrical problems in vehicles. Even if it comes down to a flat battery, you need to understand how to charge it correctly, how to maintain it as well. Understanding tools and what they do is another skill in itself, and most guys, I'd say 99.9% of guys, give them a hammer, they'll know exactly what to do with it, because it's instinctual. We've been doing it since we were apes bashing things, but things can get sophisticated. Nowadays we want to use the right hammer for the right job. So we'll look at videos of preppers and they show off the toolkits they have in their vehicles, and I know instantly what type of mechanical knowledge the guy will have by what type of tools he is showing off, and most of them have very little mechanical knowledge whatsoever, because they will have things that are absolutely irrelevant for the vehicle or unsuitable tools for the jobs that might be needed on the vehicle. And this is very subjective, of course, because the skill of the guy will show you what type of tool kit he will have. Now, there are specialist tools for specialist jobs, and like here I'm using a bush puller to pull in bushes, and this is just a time saver, because this type of job is run-of-the-mill, bread and butter, everyday type of occurrence. So it's a specialist tool which has been made for a specific job, which obviously is expensive and it needs power. This is air powered over hydraulic to pull a bush in, but it's a tool, and when you understand how you use your tools, of course you will acquire the tools, and you only acquire the tools you need for the jobs that you have and that you are capable of. Of course, there is that factor where you can minimize your toolbox and use tools for different jobs. As long as you know how to use the tools and you can see redundancy in tools, then you can use them correctly to get yourself out of trouble. Of course, alternatives are engineering tools up to do specific jobs, and if you can do that, you can get yourself out of trouble at any point, but it involves actually understanding engineering. Now, if I had a choice of anything in my bug out bag, it would be a mini set of oxyacetylene torches, because not only can it cut and heat, but it also can weld, depending on which adapters you have with the oxygen, acetylene and the supply of gas. But yes, of course, heat is one of those things which will manipulate metals. If you can turn it into liquid, then it is not tight. Right, so as I was talking earlier about lifters, anything with a flat and a jack, you can get on and repair vehicles. That's a no-brainer at the end of the day. I will talk about jacks and working on the flat and working outside and all that sort of thing, but there is always that aspect of parts as well. Now, mainly what we are fitters these days. Components are made not to be repaired. All you do is get them, replace them. Yeah, as long as you've diagnosed the fault correctly, then you can change it. But it also goes down to acquiring the parts, understanding the components and how they work as well, which is a no-brainer. Experience will tell you, especially on your own vehicle. And of course, once you know what you want and you can measure things, yes, measuring is also very important. You recognize the shapes and everything else. You go and get the bits that you need from wherever you can get them from. And I will discuss this as well, because parts acquisition is probably the mainstay for keeping going. There are some things that can be repaired and brought back into service if you don't have the parts, and there are other parts that cannot be repaired that you have to replace. If you don't, you have to find things around it. Some guys think that they can do everything tight and it will be okay, but there are tolerances on all engineering products, regardless of whether it happens to be a wheel bearing, a wheel nut, or an engine manifold stud. Very important to understand tolerances. And of course, leverage comes with tolerances, because when you have that feel, it's not about just feeling something, it's about understanding your tools and how they work and what type of leverage you can actually use to get either tightness or just tight enough. Human beings have this natural skill to recognize sizes or estimate sizes, but sometimes it's not good enough. Consumables are things that you need to replace, because after you've stripped something you may have damaged it, which means you have to replace it with a likewise components. And measuring, believe it or not, is another mainstay of skills, okay, because some guys can't use vernier calipers or micrometers, which may not be needed in certain jobs because you can estimate them, but when it comes to engineering and fine tolerances, then it is a skill within itself. Understanding thread pitches, understanding nuts and bolt threads, and pipe fittings in this case is also vital, because if you don't have the right thread, you can't fit the right pipe to the right component. Learning to be organised, and I know some guys just do not have that natural ability to be organised, but it's vital. If you're in a situation where you can't replace tools and you lose tools, this means you're not organised enough. So having that ability to be able to do that, and most preppers do because they're doing bug out bags, is crucial. Regardless of the size of the toolbox, if you know where your tools are, then you are already efficient. This means cleaning up, collecting your tools, putting them back in organised places so you can see straight away if you've lost something or misplaced it. So I've talked about tolerances and tools and everything else. Engineering skills are crucial. It used to be one time when we all used to be engineers as automotive technicians. Now this is a tool my boy made. This is a screwdriver. He's studying engineering at the moment. The most basic thing is to have a lathe and a drill and understanding how to use them. Okay, so he's built me some tools up to help me with my job, which is, well, it's a help, and it is also an alliance, because when he can build tools like this is very simply made, but you can see, if you can see the engineering that's done in a tool, then you can have it made or make it up yourself to make sure that you can do the jobs that you need to. That's crucial, and having a lathe or somebody who can use a lathe is also very, very important. It used to be at one time that all workshops would have a lathe, but nowadays they don't, because all we do is fit stuff and buy tools. But if you can't buy the tools, what are you going to do? You make them, okay? So you can see on the board here, yeah, these tools, these are really bodge tools. They're just quickly made up for a job. However, all the tools except for the grease gun on this board, okay, can be made and cut by people who understand how to manipulate metal. Well, maybe except for these circlip pliers, which maybe take a little bit more work, but all they are tubes and holes and threads, okay, and handles. Yep, so if you have the metal and you have the equipment, you can have things done. Another thing that I learned actually from my boy is to use left-handed drills to remove studs that are broken out in metal components. Yep. It's another skill to consider. Now, the last thing I want to talk about here is getting yourself out of trouble with brute force. Okay, now this I had to cut to get it off the shaft. You can see there's a split there. I used the angle grinder with a slitting disc and a hammer just to finish it off, because I couldn't remove this because of the snap ring on the end here. But the splines are saved. The main part, which is the drive shaft, is saved, and I can put another CV joint on it. Anyway guys, I'm going to wrap this up here now. I've chucked a lot at you, and some of it might seem a bit random. I know that most guys are not interested in heavy goods vehicles. However, there are possibilities, especially if you're looking to choose a vehicle to do certain jobs. And of course, if you're going to maintain it, you're going to have to either develop skills or buy the tools that you need to do the jobs with. And of course that will come in time. I'll give you more heads up during all these videos, from light vehicles, motorcycles, bicycles to the heavier stuff. Okay.